Prof. Schofield here, joined by
Kayla, Lenferna de la Motte.
we together are the Prevention is Cure R&D team, and welcome to the Prevention is Cure podcast. It's actually been a while since we got the podcast going, but we are back on track, and we will be podcasting weekly from now into the foreseeable future, give or take a few public holidays or something. I don't know, but we're here. And what's our topic today, Kayla?
We are here and we are talking about exercise today, the Goldilocks principle. Can you exercise too much? What's the volume? What's the intensity? Exercise just as being a modern day construct, the difference between steps and intentional exercise, and the power of movement on our health. So lots of ground to cover, really excited to get into the research and talk things through.
Yeah, I've spent my whole life thinking about fitness and fitness as medicine, exercise as medicine, movement as medicine. There's some complexity in this field around, what am I trying to achieve? How do I best achieve those? What would work for me? How do you negotiate your way between influencers, scientists, what you're capable of now and where you'd like to be, how much time and effort you're prepared to put in? What do the guidelines mean? If you just do those, is it good enough? What's optimizing mean? What does optimizing look like? When do you run out of fun and actually cause more harm by exercising too much? Is there such a thing? This is all before us. So, and some interesting new research to cover. Where are we starting?
Yeah, I think let's get into it with this really interesting mouse study. So what they found is that exercise has a tumor suppressive effect, whether it's before or after tumor formation or both, and if it's voluntary or if it's not. So the mice were getting electric shocks here if they didn't exercise. So in other words, exercise is anti-cancer whenever it's done. That's a pretty big statement.
Yeah, what an interesting study. Now, we're not necessarily for mouse studies to replace human studies, but let's face it, you're not going to induce tumors, and you're not going to have in humans, and you're not going to have them either voluntary exercising or exercising by means of electric shock. So,
No.
It's probably not going to happen. It's probably not ethical with humans. Well, it's probably not even ethical with mice, to be honest. But there we go. So it's interesting there, this idea that exercise is anti-cancer, because that sounds like a big statement, most of what the oncologists are going to freak out about. And, we do know things like, regardless of the treatment option you take in breast cancer,
Yes.
you double your chance of 5-year survival by moving from being inactive to active.
And I think that's why really, in New Zealand and Australia, we have the Pink and Steel Foundation, and they do amazing work there with physiotherapists about getting women post-operative in cancer treatment moving, because we can tell those massive survival implications that it has.
Yeah, and just to be clear, and I'm not suggesting that people replace their standard chemotherapy and surgery and stuff for breast cancer with exercise, but the magnitude of the effect is superior to those. So I think what you're best off doing is getting those treatments and that treatment, and then you're guaranteeing your best possible chances of getting a good outcome. But anyhow, why is that? That's the question. And how come it worked all over the place? Well, it brings me back actually to something I talked about in a radio interview a couple of years ago when they were asking me to summarize my career's work in physical activity, exercise, fitness as medicine. And they said, what do you think the main benefit of being physically active or exercise, fitness, whatever term you want to put around that is? And my response to that, I think the main thing around exercise is it makes you more insulin sensitive. And it's often not thought about, but there's a bigger context here, right? Where as a population, I would say at least half the people in the population are what we call insulin resistant. In other words, their food heightens both their glucose and insulin response compared to what it probably should be. And what that means is their glucose is higher for longer, but probably from a cancer point of view, their insulin is higher for longer. Now, insulin is anabolic. It's a growth hormone, and that's a good thing is when it comes and goes, because that's how you grow. That's how you grow muscle. Protein synthesis is done by anabolic means, in other words, by insulin being raised. But there's a difference between being raised from a meal and then just slightly post-meal and being constantly raised. And I think we've really helped coin that term in modern medicine with the work of Dr. Catherine Crofts and Joseph Kraft, is this idea of hyperinsulinemia.
Yeah.
And I think we forget the effects of exercise on hyperinsulinemia. And I think you could probably show, if you did a thought experiment where we somehow inserted an IV into you, and by infusion of insulin caused hyperinsulinemia, it just wheeled it around behind you with an IV bag for 10 years, and we had a trial where people did that and didn't do that, I think we would show that we caused more cancer in that group that had hyperinsulinemia. I think that's most likely. Obviously, we're not going to do that trial, but that's what I reckon would happen.
Yeah, and so you talk about the fact that exercise can help with this mediation, this control of both insulin and glucose. Can you talk a little bit to the mechanism? How does that actually happen?
Basically, I think the main thing is it uses up glucose.
Yeah.
And so that's, even if you're exercising at a reasonably easy intensity, and you've eaten some glucose, it'll prefer that as a fuel and use it. And then, of course, we're using muscle glycogen, even at low intensities, even if we're good fat burners, there's a proportion of that. So it's acting like another heart disease prevention drug. The drugs that you take, the SGLT2 inhibitors that you take, and they make you pee out between 60 and 80 grams of glucose a day, are sort of having the same effect with none of the other additional benefits on that. So if you wanted to get your glucose down, then, well, first of all, if you're not eating in the first place, which we'll cover in a sec, but if you are, then probably that's one good thing. At least it's going to use it up and brings, probably has other cellular effects and myokines and a whole bunch of other proteins that we don't understand that also make a cell more resilient and more insulin, better at transporting glucose.
Yeah, so I think the key takeaway there really is that exercise helps us keep our glucose under control. And in this modern environment where we tend to have such a high availability of high carbohydrate foods, and this is mismatched with this really sedentary lifestyle for many people, then the construct of, regular intentional exercise is so important.
Yeah. And I suppose we preface this at the end of all things here by saying you still hear this idea we can't outrun a bad diet.
Yes.
And I agree with that, and I disagree with the different parts of that statement. So first of all, it's true, like if you're just chowing down junk food, no matter how much you're exercising, you're probably still going to cause high glucose and hyperinsulinemia. And a good example of this, there's an elite triathlete, Canadian guy in States, I've just forgotten his name, pretty good, came second in the World Championships a couple of years ago. Developed type 2 diabetes. It's an astonishing thing. He's training 30 hours a week, but a lot of carbs, which is really an interesting thing that's even possible. So, so you can't outrun a bad diet in that sense.
No, you can't. And I think it's astonishing. You watch athletes spend their careers living and subsisting on high carbohydrate diets from a performance perspective, and then they retire. And that appetite for sugar goes nowhere. And the knock-on effects very often are development of type 2 diabetes and then cardiovascular disease and the smorgasbord of chronic disease that comes along with it. And it's because of this, this lifelong runway of a high carbohydrate environment in their body.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm not here to question that there are ergogenic, positive effects of taking carbohydrate when you're in sport. I realistically think there are. There's other things around metabolic flexibility we might talk about later. Those are things. So I think that's the thing. In some ways, that's 100% true. You can't outrun a bad diet.
Yes.
On the other hand, it sets up a supposition that what's more important, exercise or diet? And I've been fond of saying over the years, it's such a loaded, stupid question. It's like asking you, Kayla, would you rather lose your left hand or your right foot?
Oh, neither if I had the choice.
No, so because it's a stupid head to head.
Yeah.
Of course, it's ridiculous. So yeah, should you be doing exercise or diet? And the answer is they're both independently important things for having a long and healthy life. In many ways, the exercise evidence is even stronger than the diet one. Not that I don't think diet's important. It's just that the measurement in prospective studies that follow these sorts of things, it's so much easier to measure how much people move, or even easier, or harder and easier, but more accurate to measure something like their cardiorespiratory fitness. There's no, you think about cardiorespiratory fitness, VO2 max is sort of a weighted moving average of your whole life.
Yeah.
How much activity you've done. So you come with some genes, and then you've had an active or not active youth, and then that's all built into how much of a beast you become, and then as you age that declines a bit, but it's maintained better by keeping active.
Yeah.
And then it's most recently weighted by how much stuff you've been doing in the last few months, and then tapers off for a little less weighting for the last year, but still more weighting than the year before. It's like such an amazing measure of your capability of how much activity you've done.
Yeah.
Whereas try that with diet. We've been stuck down the track of going, oh, well, what do you recall eating?
Yeah.
Over the last week?
And there's so many pitfalls, right, when you get people to recall things. If you said to me, Kayla, what did you have 3 days ago for breakfast? I could probably tell you because I'm a creature of habit, but most people can't. They eat things, move on, and forget what they've done. And there's other issues, right? People underestimate and overestimate, and that's correlated with body size and all sorts of other things.
Yep.
We don't have a solid measure or proxy for diet like we do for fitness.
Yeah. And saying that, why don't we go to this next twin study that you were talking about before we started this?
This is probably one of the coolest studies I've stumbled on recently. So it was released just earlier this year. And what they did is they took 22,750 Finnish twins. I reckon that's all the Finnish twins. What do you think?
That's an astonishing thing. Like to take 22,000 twins, it's got to be every twin born in Finland for a period of time, I suppose.
Like all of them.
Convince them to go on a study and then follow them up. But how long do they follow them up for?
Yeah, so it was crazy. So all of these twins were born before 1958. And what they measured was their leisure time physical activity. And this was a self-report, so questionnaires. And they measured it at 3 distinct time points. So in 1975, in 1981, and in 1990. And then mortality follow-up, so whether they died, continued up until the end of 2020. So pretty recently.
Wow.
And so just the scope, to take a moment and pause, the scope of that project and how many people they had involved and how long the follow-up was is astonishing.
Yeah.
The measure itself is questionable.
Yeah.
And what they found was that the greatest benefit was at around 7%. Lowered risk of mortality was achieved between the sedentary and the moderately active group. So those are those who are going from doing nothing at all in their leisure time to sort of meeting the physical activity guidelines. That's not to say that those at the top end didn't get benefits. It's just to say that the greatest net benefit was happening right at the bottom, from doing nothing to doing something. And the other interesting takeaway from this study for me was this concept that association between leisure time physical activity and biological aging, and I think they used telomeres for this, was a U-shaped curve. So biological aging was accelerated in those who exercised the least and the most. And
Wow.
you had some thoughts around that, didn't you, Grant?
Well, I think there's a few things to unpack here. So the first thing is, what's the use of asking people how much they move? Does it bear any resemblance to reality? So it does bear quite a bit of resemblance to reality in terms of voluntary planned movement. And it has no real reality to things like steps accumulated, so the accidental stuff. And we'll come back to that in our next study after this. So,
yeah.
But it does, people, I went for a walk, I did some gardening, I exercised. It captures that pretty well. And it's not, unlike food recalls, people sort of remember what they ate, but unfortunately it's confounded by body size. So the fatter people under-report more, which is unfortunate to get good data, but that's not the case in physical activity. People there's no particular bias there, people report that. So, it found an effect. The first thing is that's, and there's longitudinal studies, it's confounded, but it's way less confounded with twins, right?
Yeah.
Because there's things that you can't measure that vary, and that stuff's up studies, but this, is probably minimized here. So it's one of the better ones for that. And it's a big study, and it's over a long period of time, and it's got endpoints. What's an endpoint? Something we realistically know happened.
Yep.
They died.
They died.
Yeah. So that's probably known.
Yep.
And so that's all good. They found the biggest effect on reducing risk was going from doing nothing, getting off the couch, to doing something.
Yeah.
And so that's not new either.
Yeah.
That begs but it's not the end of the effect. And so it's really interesting. In every country, including New Zealand and Australia, we have physical activity guidelines. So you should achieve 30 minutes of at least moderate activity, try and get that 5 days a week. That's sort of a minimum standard. We've set the bar as low as possible, with the hope that we can get the biggest public health effect is getting the 50% of people who don't meet those guidelines off the couch.
Yeah.
So that's the astonishing thing, right? That 50% of people don't meet that.
Yep.
Yet we're mostly caught up, and most of the people listening to this are caught up in the optimizer community, where we're like, wow, 30 minutes, whatever. What about your resistance training? Is it zone 2? Is it zone 3? You're doing HIIT. What are you doing for the other components of fitness? So that's the thing. But what they also found here is, with this biological aging thing, is interesting. So they didn't die more or earlier at the highest activity, but they had more biological aging as measured by telomere fragmentation and fraying. Well, it's a really interesting thing. So that's actually quite a common finding in self-reported activity, that at the margin, at the very right of that curve, people who report doing the most hours activity actually don't do as well as people just back a bit from that.
Yeah.
They seem to go worse. What's interesting, though, that's not repeated when you measure cardiorespiratory fitness. So if you put them on treadmill and do a VO2 max, the fittest people, the super elite fitness, live the longest with the least disability. So there's no such effect there for actual fitness as measured objectively, but there is an effect for self-reported amount of time. So I don't really understand why that's different. What do you reckon?
What a question, springing to my mind as you're talking, and this concept of it. Is there something here in this perceived exertion or overreaching, essentially? Are those who are reporting all of this exercise actually reaching beyond their capacity?
So they're not as fit as they could be by doing a bit less.
Yeah.
So that's possible, and I think that's partially explains it. And the other one possibly that explains it is also cardiorespiratory fitness itself is confounded by genes or physical function. So you're just born a more capable specimen of a human, and somehow that's part of it. So it's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy that the less accidents you get into, you don't become disabled because you bugging up your knees so much you can't move anymore, and so that's confounded. So I'm not sure we know the answer, but I suppose from my own experience, I think a working adult, there's only a certain amount of activity you can get before you get overwhelmed.
Yes.
And whether that makes you less fit or it just screws you up and makes you less well in the long run.
Yeah.
It's probably true. You need to recover.
You need to recover. And I was even just thinking about sort of the range of intensity with which you do that exercise. You might be doing 10 hours total, but half of that could be sort of walking with friends or walking the dog or whatever the case is. And then that other half, you start to get into those higher zones, adding resistance training, all that other stuff. So is that person better off than the person who's, I don't know, out there doing zone 5 runs every single day?
Well, yeah, I mean, you do CrossFit, so let me ask you that question. My not so much negativity around CrossFit, my criticism of some of the CrossFit athletes is their exposure to too many high intensity exercise sessions in a week, and it causes injury, and it's not sustained.
Yeah, and I think that's where, for me, programming is such an important aspect when it comes to, those weekend warriors like myself, and setting your ego aside. So just because the board says we're going to do X, Y, and Z, you need to be able to pull yourself back and go, right, in my tank today, I have 70%. I'm not going to push myself as hard. You just move slower. And I think what can often happen in environments like CrossFit, BFT, functional fitness spaces, where you're working to try and score higher than the person next to you, is you go in there and intentionally exert yourself at a higher intensity every single day. And so it's about being able to, look inward and go, actually, today I'm going to go 50%. And I don't care if my score is lower today.
Yeah.
And that balance between, the longer style hit, the shorter style hit, and then having resistance and being able to moderate that volume across all of those things is a trick that, I'll be frank, I haven't learned quite yet.
So I don't know if people know, but I coach a number of young men who are elite triathletes. One of them's gone on to be, win world championships races as a pro triathlete. What I say to them is, you have an ego. It's really important. It helps you race. For almost all of your sessions, what I'm going to ask you to do is, as you're leaving the house, take your ego out and put it in a brown paper bag by the kitchen counter and leave it there, and then come back later. So I've got guys who are really absolutely world class. They'll go out with the local groups and be at the back and taking no part in the stupidity of
The full
community
send.
Well, that's the way it tends to go.
Yeah.
Especially with young men. And so that's the hardest lesson for them to learn, frankly. And it's one that they really struggle with. Take your ego out, put it in a brown paper bag and leave it at home. So if you're at that end of the optimizing your health and you want to do a volume of exercise, then I do think you have to be very careful about overdoing it. And this is coming from someone who has historically overdone it back in my professional triathlete days. I think I wish I know now what I knew then. We all think that, right? So everyone listening to this, you want to reflect on previous versions of you in your life. If you're not slightly embarrassed about yourself, then you're probably not moving forward.
Oh, 100%. I look back on my swimming days as a teenager and go, I can't believe I was doing that volume to get those results. That seems ludicrous.
Yeah.
And I think there's the concepts of move well first, then move with intention, then move with load. And I think so often when we take up sports like running, there's big craze around running at the moment, so many people just actually don't even run well to begin with. And so making sure that you're moving well first before you add intensity and load and volume is really important.
Yeah. And if you get to a day when you're tired, if you feel tired and you don't know if you want to do it and you can't just have a rest, which is probably the best thing, just to say no. And if you want to go out, then just say, I'll give myself 10 minutes.
Yes.
And I can make a decision then about whether I'm pulling the pin and carrying on or whatever. For people who are at the optimizing end of exercising, they virtually need the exact opposite instructions from the people who are just getting started and coming off the couch.
Yeah.
Which is, you need to know when to stop, otherwise you're going to harm your health.
Yes.
And probably annoy other people around you because you'll be a grumpy bastard. And that's the exact opposite instruction to the 10-minute rule still applies to the person getting off the couch. It's like, no matter how you feel, how unmotivated you feel, do 10 minutes and see if you can carry on from there. And so the 10-minute rule works both ways, but
Yes.
for the exact opposite reason, which is so interesting.
Oh, 100%. And I think this is where that sort of Goldilocks principle comes in. How much is too much? How much is enough? Is really, it's a goals-based question. Like, what are you trying to achieve? That will dictate. And also, what is your fitness history? Where have you come from? Those two questions will dictate what is enough and how much you need to do, how much load you need to engage in. But then you need these mediating questions or strategies or tools that either A, get you going, or B, stop you when you need to be stopped.
So that question, or how much exercise should you do and how much and what would the program look like and everything, it is about as stupid as asking the question is how fast and how far should I drive my car? Because in the car thing, it makes no sense. Well, it depends on where you're trying to go.
Yes.
And it depends on the car. And it depends on the fuel in the car and how much fuel's in the car. It depends on how much the car's been tuned up and how much it's done recently and how new it is, how old it is. These are all relevant factors to deciding on how far and how fast you should go in this car. And I think the same, without being too flippant, applies to human exercise. Clearly,
Yeah.
if you haven't been doing much, then and you're a different type of car than someone who's been doing 20 hours training a week. Clearly, if you've eaten well and you have the nutrients on board, then you're a different type of person, a different type of car than someone who hasn't eaten and hasn't got enough nutrients to do the session and then recover from it. So, I mean, I find that whole discussion quite bad. I would say one thing I reckon about exercise and fitness at the moment, if you're skilled at all with AI, have a good chat with a good AI back and forth and ask it a lot of good questions and talk about where you're at, where you'd like to be. I found the AI advice around exercise programming for meeting people where they're at, and that's just good health coaching, right?
Yeah.
Meet yourself where you're at. If you're trying to do this yourself, or you're a health coach, meet the other person where they're at. They're not you, they're them. But AI will, like a good health coach, will ask some really good questions and give you some good advice. And as long as you keep feeding it back with sensible prompts, I've actually found it really useful. In fact, I'm embarking on a triathlon. I haven't done, I used to do professional triathlons years ago, but I haven't done one for ages. So I'm doing a 17.3 in September in Sunshine Coast. But I'm being coached by AI.
I love it.
I found it useful.
We found it exceptionally useful. At the beginning of this year, my husband and I decided we were going to go back to doing some hypertrophy, some strength training, trying to gain some muscle, myself for CrossFit, him just for aesthetic reasons. And we gave AI a really robust prompt, let it know where we both were, let it know what we wanted to achieve, how long we wanted to be in the gym, all these sorts of things. And I went back and forth with it a couple of times. And I mean, my squat and my deadlift went up massively. My husband's bench press went up massively. So I think, like you say, if you're engaging with AI, feeding it the right prompts, it never replaces a health coach, because what it doesn't do is help with that accountability piece.
That's 100% true. It doesn't hold you accountable.
It doesn't. If I just said to my AI, cool, thanks, no problem, I'm going to go to the gym, and then didn't go, there's no accountability there.
True.
So I think as health coaches, like if you're listening and you're a health coach at any space, start to understand how can you work with AI instead of against AI. It's not going anywhere. So get fluent and get fluent fast is my biggest piece of advice.
Yeah. And people can use it for meal planning, all sorts of things as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, last little study is one on steps that we saw recently. Well,
yeah.
there's two.
Well, there's two to it, right? So the first thing is this, I was really curious about steps because you hear all sorts of numbers, right? You hear 5,000, 8,000, 10,000. But the nagging question at the back of my mind was, does this leisure time activity, does it attenuate or eliminate, early mortality? For so many of us, we spend 8 to 10 to 12 hours sitting at a desk. Is my 10,000 steps or my 1 hour of moderate physical activity actually going to do anything? And so there was a 2016 study. It was a meta-analysis. We'll drop the link in the notes. And what it showed is that actually just meeting the guidelines was not enough. You had to do more, and you had to do more intensity as well. So if you're in a sedentary job, I'm sorry to say, you're going to need to do about 60 to 75 minutes of exercise a day, and it's going to need to be moderate to intense. So that lighter activity is not going to offset your long sitting periods. And then I think you were looking at a couple of step-based studies, right, Grant?
Yeah. Well, first, I agree with that. That's the sort of idea that sedentariness actually is a whole separate, independent risk to being active, and you have to probably take some more active means to overcome that. And so sedentary jobs are bad for you in that sense. You hear a lot of stuff.
As we sit.
Oh, well, no, yeah, that's right. Sitting's the new smoking, and that's not quite true, because the hazard ratio of dying from cigarette smoking is 2.8, and that's not the case for sitting. It's 1 point something. So it's not the new smoking, but it's still a risk. Second, there's a couple of just interesting things. So, if you achieve 8,000 steps a day, and most people have a Fitbit or a smartwatch or something, a lot of people measure that. Then you halve your chance of dying from people who don't achieve 8,000 steps. So, that's a massive effect in medicine. Halve your chance of anything by just achieving. So that's sort of minimum activity. I spent a lot of my career, the early parts of my careers in the early 2000s, back when there was pedometers, little smartwatches, you attach the little pendulum thing, and the Yamex Digivwalker and all these little things. So I started my career in that space with a project called 10,000 Steps Rockhampton. And that became 10,000 Steps Australia. Then when we moved over to New Zealand, we had the Vitality Works, and we started the 10,000 Steps New Zealand and those group-based pedometer challenges and all that type of work. And there's always been a lot of criticism around the 10,000 steps. Well, where do you get that from? It's like, well, we started off the Japanese. They thought of it first. Menpo Kai, 10,000 steps, whatever. Well, what's the evidence for that? And it's like, well, and what about the half hour a day? Because actually 10,000 steps works out to be about an hour 20 of walking, which is way more than the guidelines. But of course you can accumulate it across the day. So it's not really an hour 20 of actual walking. It's more like if you did 30 minutes of voluntary walking and then took opportunities throughout the day, you'll probably get to 10,000.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting. I was just looking at another claim by Nick Norwitz on X here. And what was he saying? That presented with an opportunity of the stairs or the elevator, only 2% of people take the stairs option, which is astonishing, right?
I still can't believe the number is so low.
Yeah.
But we see it, right? We see it every day when we get into the office. We are one floor up and we see people take the lift to go up one floor.
Well, I'd bike in and then I'd take the back stairs up, which are quite dingy and you have to go through, and people are coming up from that car park from parking or biking. And I've never in 3 years here seen anyone other than me and Louise take those stairs.
Yep.
And we've walked past people just waiting there and you often beat them up.
Yep.
Which is a source of pride to me.
And I wonder, like, what is it that would make somebody more likely to take the stairs? Are there personal factors? Are there environmental factors?
Yeah, I'm not aware of any personal factors. I mean, the one thing to circle back on the insulin sensitivity thing, I once thought that you could get people to move more incidentally around the office by putting up signs, take the stairs, not the lift, or in our case, we'd also give people standing desks.
Yep.
And it makes a small but hardly any difference, and it's not really sustainable.
Okay.
And it's one of the reasons I actually got into low carb and keto and insulin sensitivity, is that we'd done a couple of studies where we built office furniture, standing height office furniture, and we put it into workplaces. Mm-hmm. We did a study in New Zealand, for example, and we discovered no difference really of any meaning. And at the same time, a colleague of ours, Jim Levine from the US, had done more detailed studies, and he had noticed in office environments that there was a profound difference in exactly the same office between the amount people incidentally moved. And so he did on body weight. So the most obese group moved about 5 kilometers less and stood up an extra 50 times less and moved around less than the leanest people in the office. And it was the exact same office environment. So the question is there something fundamentally different about those people? And I reckon, it's my hypothesis that got me into that, it's insulin sensitivity and leptin sensitivity. I think there's animal evidence for this and human evidence.
Yeah.
If you're leptin resistant, then there's a tendency for you to down-regulate your activity. And this is the whole problem with metabolic syndrome, right? Is that an insulin resistance is that when you're like that, you tend to want to move less.
Yeah, the lazy lion sort of syndrome, right? Lazing out, waiting for the next meal, conserving as much energy as you can.
No, it's sort of it's sort of like that, except for it's really more, how do I put it, that you've had constantly high insulin, and this constantly high insulin impairs leptin getting to the brain. And when leptin's not getting to the brain, you don't understand that you're full. And so when you're not realizing you're full of food, even though you are, then you go into an energy saving mode, which is what you were talking about, which is I'm not moving because I need to conserve energy. I'll move, but only if you move the food container. And any food that does come in, I'm going to store it as fat because I'm clearly not getting enough. Mm-hmm. So you're getting this fake starvation from insulin resistance that is not a real thing. So anyway, a long ways round to the steps stuff is maybe it's insulin sensitivity that describes all of this extra incidental activity, because there's obviously a difference between how much we move. And you can even go back a step from that. We've studied fidgeting.
Yeah.
So I'm a fidgeter.
Yes.
Except for now. I'm not fidgeting today.
No, because you've been on your fast.
So I'm on my 5th day of a 5-day fast, and I and conserving energy.
Yeah, you're less fidgety than every other day of the year.
Yeah. I mean, normally I sit there with a pen and I click it and it interferes with the podcast, or I'm trying to undo the little, we even bought a fidget spinner.
Maybe that's a good point. When we're podcasting, we'll just get you to fast and then you won't fidget with pens.
Yeah. So I think there's a starvation effect, even if it's a fake-induced one for high insulin, or it's a real one from not actually eating. Maybe that something.
So we've covered quite a bit of ground, and I think it's time that we just sort of wrap up with a couple of quick fire questions when it comes to exercise. So I think we've covered this first one, but let's give it a go. How much do you really need to exercise each week?
It depends on where you're coming from and where you want to go.
Fabulous. Can you exercise too much?
Almost certainly, and it depends on where you come from, where you want to go, but also how much you can recover.
Yeah.
But even then, I think you probably can.
Yeah. Is daily exercise better than 3 to 4 times a week?
I think movement should be built into every day.
How hard should my workouts feel?
Well, most of the time, they shouldn't feel hard at all. And even when they're hard, they shouldn't feel that hard because you're recovered enough and you have the energy to go hard.
Yeah.
So I don't think exercise should ever feel particularly hard.
Love it. How do I know if I am doing the right amount of exercise?
I don't know the answer to that. I suppose that you won't feel lethargic because you've lazed around too much, and you'll feel relatively energized, but you won't feel so tired that you can't get up for it the next time. So that's such a good indicator, right? You need to be able to feel some enthusiasm most of the time for what's coming up. And if you're not, you're probably doing too much, or you're not doing enough, because either way it sends you down a rabbit hole of not wanting to do it.
100%. The other indicator I usually think about is it disrupting or displacing other areas of my life that are impacting my health? Am I exercising so much that I'm sleeping too little or too much?
Oh, yeah.
Or, am I displacing my social time with friends and family? So I think that's a good indicator as well.
Yeah, or if you're known to be a grumpy bastard, it's plausible that you could be doing too much.
Or too little.
Well, there's sorry, Matt Brick, if you hear this, who's a surgeon in Auckland, used to be a world-class triathlete. He'd always say, if you meet more than 2 bastards in one day, you're overtraining.
It's not you. It's not them, it's you. And last question, this does tie in, it's not directly exercise related, but should I be taking creatine?
Yeah, I'm not one who's been ever big on representing saying people should use supplements.
Yeah.
The one I'm now consistent on taking, and I want to have my 86-year-old mother, my mother and father-in-law, my kids, and myself taking is creatine monohydrate. I think the astonishing evidence that both enhances and improves exercise performance and enhances muscle mass, but also improves brain structure and function, reduces things like depression symptoms, is now actually becoming overwhelming. And it's cheap.
Yeah.
It tastes relatively disgusting, but do you take it?
Yeah, absolutely. I put it in my smoothie every single morning.
How much do you take?
The usual 5-gram scoop. You can go through loading phases of, hypertrophy is what it is you're after. But if you're just after, cognitive clarity, helping with recovery, which is predominantly why I take it, then 5 grams per day is more than enough. It's sufficient.
So I've gone for 10 grams.
Oh.
But I consistently also, this might not speak to the cognitive function thing, but I consistently forget to take it. So I think it evens out at about 7 grams a day.
Yeah.
But there are studies recently with 10 and 20 grams for plausible extra benefit. Not that I'm in need of plausible extra benefit, but I don't know. And it's I buy the biggest plain branded bag from where I get it from, and I don't think there's great evidence that there's differences in quality between that.
No, but that actually raises a really interesting point on creatine. So all the rage right now, especially with people in my sort of age bracket, so 20s and 30s, is creatine gummies. I'll just take some creatine gummies and that'll be my creatine sorted and I'll be good. It's really prominent in sort of the CrossFit space as well. Right? And somebody has recently done a large-scale study and tested creatine gummies from all over the market and has found them either lacking the dosage they claim or not having any creatine in them at all. And so I think if it was me, just buy the powder. Just buy monohydrate powder.
I didn't know you could get creatine gummies, but I did know that you could get collagen gummies, because
Yes.
Louise was buying them from Costco, and basically they're like lollies, they're like snakes, you get those. And so what happens is that we just end up eating them. I have like 10 in a day. It's like 10 of them are good fun, but they're actually just lollies as far as I'm concerned.
I would agree. I think where you can, supplementation should be just that, supplementation, not an extra sweet or snack in your diet. So we've covered some great ground here, Grant. We've talked about, the difference between incidental and structured exercise, hitting your steps versus actually going out and doing something. How much is too much? What are the effects of exercise's interaction, cancer? Are there any kind of closing remarks before we wrap up today?
I mean, if you get on social media and you see Peter Attia, you'll see him going around the fitness as medicine angle, which I like, but he's very consistent in his messaging, is that if you want the maximum dose of longevity, in other words, you want to get 10 years added to your life and have that 10 years to be free of disability, then you would try and strive for the higher levels of fitness. And that's a fundamentally well-known piece of epidemiology. Some people would say that's confounded, and I did allude to that a bit earlier, but I think it's likely to be almost certainly true that exercise confers good health and disability-free good health. And so the fact that fitness is medicine, and only 50% of New Zealanders and Australians meet the minimum guidelines, the rest are classified as insufficiently active or sedentary on the lowest possible indicator, indicates we've got a lot of work to do in society. And I know most of the people listening to this will be in the optimizing category, thinking about actually how do I do better, and I'm already that. But if you want to have an impact on the health of a whole country, then there's a lot of work to do here.
100%. And I think health coach is one of the greatest tools in your toolbox when it comes to, getting people right off the couches, is those activities. Where can they find 5, 10, 15-minute windows in their day to be active and take it slow?
Yeah, and people don't want to start with that because they want to, if you're already down the journey like me, you're like, well, come on, let's enroll in a triathlon, but let's be honest. Hey, it's Grant here. Thanks for listening to the podcast. We don't advertise. We're never going to, but we have one request for you and one only. If you felt this show was worthwhile, can you please rate us, and please rate us 5 stars? That's it. Thanks very much. Podcast is over.